right. I think we will slowly start kicking off. I can see more and more people are joining the session. We're in excess of 250 participants now, which is great. I guess it also a little bit reflective of the times we live in, that risk is something that is extremely relevant and on top of everybody's mind. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to be discussing the Global Risk Report of 25, and we're going to be looking at it from the perspective of the European risk managers and internal auditors. This is a session co-hosted by FERMA, so the Federation of European Risk Managers, as well as the European Confederation of Institutes of Internal Audit. Welcome to everyone. Before we kick off, just a very quick housekeeping message. We will have a dedicated session for Q&A towards the end, so please don't hold back. Do post your questions, do that in the chat, and we'll try and answer and engage with as many as possible towards the end. We will have the Q&A. I think without further adaudue, considering the limited time we have to discuss all the risks and the wonderful panel that I have with me today, I think we'll just start with introductions. My name is Daria. I am the CEO of the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and I serve on FERMA's Foresight Committee. And I've been given the pleasure to guide you through the session today. And with me today, I have Lorraine. Maybe we can start with you.
Thank you, Daria. And hi, everyone. I'm Lorraine Stack. I'm the Risk Management Segment Leader with Marsh, and I'm based in Dublin, in Ireland.
Great, welcome. Laurence?
Yes, nice to meet you all. Laurence Eeckman. I'm a VP Group Risk Management at Atlas Copco, and I'm also a member of FERMA board.
And last but not least, Anne.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ann Brook. I am the Head of Technical Content and Research at the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, and I'm here today speaking on behalf of FEMA-ECIIA, and that's me.
I think we'll just kick off with probably one of the main reports for the year among the few we'll be discussing today, and that's, of course, the risk report from the World Economic Forum. And Lorraine, you've kindly offered to take us through the main points of that. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daria. So, hello, everybody. Yes, Global Risks Report 2025. I've been in this role as Risk Management Segment Leader for a year, and prior to that, I was in the captive group with Marsh for over 20 years. So I spent most of my career in the large risk and complex risk space. And I love the insurance industry, love it, been in the industry for many, many years. But I do find that, sometimes we love our silos and we love rushing straight to solutions. So sometimes it can be difficult to find something that gives me a horizon scan, right? So what's really happening, what risks should I be aware of, which is why I love the Global Risks Report. It really gives me a true horizon scan. It tunes out the rhetoric of the noise of the news that we're hearing every day and really focuses on reality, which is a huge benefit in thinking about the risk landscape. This year is the 20th edition of the report. And the timing of the issuance of the report is actually is key, as it's issued right before the annual World Economic Forum meeting at Davos. And Davos took place a few weeks ago. And the theme of Davos this year was collaboration for the intelligent age, which is a super clever theme, given the findings of the Global Risks Report. And it really captures the essence of both the challenge and the opportunity of the moment. And the challenge is for us to find opportunities to collaborate and cooperate at a time of increasing fragmentation. And then the opportunity, which is the amazing promise of technology in helping us to meet these challenges. So a couple of things about the report. It's a risk report, right? So it's not looking at the opportunities. It's doom and gloom. It's a little gloomy. And then the other thing is that it's a perceptions report. So that's kind of something to bear in mind as we're working our way through some of the conclusions. It's over 100 pages. It's very dense. It's very detailed. There is an executive summary that's super. And what we're going to do today is really just look through some of the highlights. So maybe, Francesca, if you take me on to the next slide, please. Great. So starting on the right side, I said, 20th year of publication. And the report is rooted in 2 surveys. First of all, there's the Global Risk Perception Survey. And this is a survey of over 900 risk experts from across the world, representing businesses, governments, NGOs, international organizations, and academia. And then the second survey is the Executive Opinion Survey. And this represents the views of over 11,000 company executives in 121 countries around the world. And you will see, as we work our way through some of these key results, that their viewpoints, so that the differences between the global risk perception, so academia and experts, and the business community are actually quite stark. So in both of these studies, they were asked to look at the probability and impact of 33 risks across 3 time horizons. Historically, there was only 2 time horizons. There was the near future, which was the short to medium risks, and then the longer term risk which would be the 10-year horizon. But this year, probably to do with the risk landscape, this year, there's an additional lens that we're looking at, and that is the current risks in 2025. And really what we're seeing is, number one there, a world of growing divisions. We just open the news every day and we can see where we're at. So state-based armed conflict is at an absolute high. We've got extreme weather events, like all of the time. We're absolutely increasing the number of extreme weather events every year. We're seeing geoeconomic confrontation. I mean, ultimately, last year's report asked the question, are we close to the tipping point? And this year's report is telling us that we've passed the point of no return, particularly with environmental risks, which have become an urgent reality. We've got technological risks, and there's a complacency there about how the pace of how technology is advancing. And all of this is rising concerns around inequality and social supports. So how do we collaborate as risk management in terms of sharing challenges in such a fractured world? It's not easy. It is definitely not easy, but let's explore how we can. So maybe if we go on to the next slide, Francesca, what we're going to be looking at is this slide looks at the outlook, right? The general outlook and how that looks at the moment. And it looks at 2 time horizons. In the top there, the top bar, we have the 2-year time horizon, and then we have a 10-year horizon. And it is asking respondents to say what their perspective on risk and how gloomy or how positive it would be over the next 2 to 10 years. And what we're seeing there is in the 2-year horizon, respondents are saying that 88% of respondents are saying that it'll either be unsettled or stormy. And that actually, it gets even worse across the 10-year horizon. So across the 10-year horizon, 92% of respondents are saying it's going to be unsettled, turbulent, or stormy. And a couple of things to bear in mind with this is that, well, first of all, the timing of the survey. The survey was done in September and October last year, which actually means that this was before the November US election. It was before the California wildfires. It was even before the Valencia floodings that we saw last year. So the perception, even before these events, was not good. And the fact that the perception over the 10-year horizon is even worse than the short-term horizon suggests that respondents are not confident in the structures that we have in place to meet the demands over time. So it's very gloomy. And Francesca, if we have a look at the next slide, we're looking at the current risk landscape. So this is over the next year. And the highest ranked risk here is state-based armed conflict. There's a record number of conflicts happening around the world, the highest since the end of the Cold War. And with these then becomes related, humanitarian emergencies. We're seeing Ukraine, the Middle East, and then humanitarian consequences in Gaza, Sudan, and Somalia. Ceasefire in Gaza, Israeli conflict, and the release of hostages and prisoners of war, all very positive. But tensions are really still very high and peace is very, very tentative. And what we're seeing then around all of this is that all those multilateral organizations that were established after World War II to encourage peace and trade around the world, you know, they really are weak. Things like the UN Security Council. And ultimately what we're seeing is an alarming lack of appetite for multilateralism. Military spending is increasing dramatically while humanitarian funding is declining. There's a growth in unilateralism. And, you know, this is for our clients and for our companies. This is really creating shifts around supply chains and shifts around trade flows. Rising protectionism and increased trade disputes have led to a significant increase in tariffs and trade barriers worldwide. We're living in a more complex and uncertain trading environment. And really, this is why geocentric confrontations have come up there as number 3, which is, and it was the highest ranking risk or the highest moving risk since last year. And all of these top 5 risks, ultimately they compound each other. They compound and they are interrelated, and they amplified each other, and are having a huge impact on our supply chain. Now, that's the current risk landscape. We're going to look at the 2 and the 10-year horizons. But first, before we do that, let's have a little look back and to see how these risks have evolved over time. So Francesca, if you take me on to the next slide. So this is a it's very colorful. It's quite noisy. So let me unpack it for you. First of all, the key here is in the color codes. So blue is economic risk, green is environmental, orange is geopolitical, red is societal, and purple is technological. And what we're looking at here is the top 5 risks over the last number of years, back to 2011, and how that has progressed over time. So in 2011 to 2011 to 2014, you see a lot of blue, a lot of economic risks. And this is after the global financial crisis. So lots of blue there, but blue sort of definitely disappears then over time. In 2015, we see the first, some red, we see infectious diseases there popping up at number 2 in 2015, which would have been the Ebola outbreak in Africa. But then infectious diseases then disappear until 2021. And we know what the 2021 infectious disease was, of course. But then if you look, infectious diseases disappears again, which is hard to believe considering how, you know, the impact that it had in 2021. And we're seeing then a lot more green, a lot more environmental risks pop up over time. And ultimately then we finally see some technological risks in 2024 and 2025. So misinformation and disinformation was the top risk, top 2-year horizon risk over both 2024 and 2025. And this was largely to do with a huge amount of elections that were happening around the world in 2024. So, you know, the fallout from that, or the potential for misinformation and disinformation to impact those political or elections was immense. We didn't see too much outcry about this in 2024, the US election, but certainly it did have an impact here in closer to home. Some of you may remember that the Romanian presidential election was annulled in December due to suspected voter manipulation around social media. So it certainly is there. And the speed at which the narrative can be manipulated is quite alarming. And now, of course, we're seeing US or fact checkers being removed in the US, and a real move towards technological deregulation in the US. So big tech is pitching for a rollback on regulation, specifically around generative AI, where they felt that the previous US administration was cracking down on AI and stifling innovation. And of course, the US are looking to the EU and telling us, you know, you need to do something on regulation also, which is, they're not just speaking to us about regulation around tech, they're speaking to us on a number of issues, but certainly they are keen to have us reconsider our regulatory environment for AI here in Europe. And, it's not just about us, about civil organizations and about and elections. It's also, this matters, AI, and it impacts companies as well. So a rumor about a product being unsafe could result in decreased sales or loss of customer trust. And misinformation and disinformation could lead to fluctuation of stock prices, like if false news spreads about a company's financial health. So it's absolutely key, cybersecurity and regulation and vigilance around AI is absolutely key. But number two there is, of course, extreme weather for the near and long term. And actually, Francesca, if you bring me on to the next slide, what we're going to find here is, on this slide, we're looking at the 2-year horizon and the 10-year horizon, both on one slide. And the last column from the previous slide is actually represented here. So the top 10 risks in the near term, you see these here: misinformation and disinformation and extreme weather events. And when we look to the longer term, we see environmental risks really, really, absolutely. The top 4 risks are environmental. So speaking about extreme weather, so the Swiss Re Sigma report was released quite recently, and they tell us that more than $135 billion of insured extreme weather events occurred in 2024. So, that's just 2024. And already the California wildfires of this year, which just in January, that was 35 billion. So extreme weather events are increasing every year, and trend estimates are suggesting a 5 to 7% increase every year. And this, of course, was highlighted in the FERMA Global Risk Manager Survey in 2024, where over 50% of risk managers think that risks, activities, and or locations will be uninsurable in the near future. So that's a scary thought, but one thing that we need to prepare for, because what we're learning is that insurance is not necessarily going to be the answer for everything. It is part of the solution, but not the answer. In fact, insurance may well be a short-term solution to buy us time to build resilience for the longer term. And emergent technologies do offer hope, but the effects of climate change are already here, and adaptation and mitigation are key. So we need to improve resilience. Insurance, as I said, is not alone, it's not sufficient. The broader ecosystem, broader economic and alternative risk solutions need to be considered too. Things like captives, my previous world, captives. We expect to see captives being used more as companies are expected to retain more risks. Public-private partnerships, maybe community-based catastrophe funds, building back more resilient buildings. Everything will be, everything points to us creating a more resilient infrastructure. In both of these, we see very, very little blue, and not a whole lot of societal risks, although they're there: inequality and social polarization. But really, all of these risks lead us to inequality and societal polarization. And maybe on the next slide, actually, Francesca, we can see how that might play out. So this shows how the global risks are interconnected, and how how some of them can exacerbate others. So to help you to interpret this, if we look at the nodes, that is the circles, right? The circles, the size of the circle determine the influence, right? High, medium, or low. And then the edges between the lines between the circles then determine the relative influence, high, medium, and low. And we see that, all of these risks have a very, very strong correlation to societal polarization, inequality, and decline in wealth and health, and in health and well-being. I think of things like involuntary migration as a result of climate change, things that we might not have seen in the past. And one thing, a really interesting part of the report looks at super aging societies. Societies such as Japan, South Korea, Italy, and Germany. there are unfavorable demographic changes that really could accentuate these risks over the next 10 years. If you think about the pension crisis, labor shortages, shortages in long-term care, all of these will actually exacerbate the societal polarization and exacerbate these problems that we're seeing. I mentioned in the previous slides that we didn't see a lot of blue, but let's for a moment look at the business leaders' approach. So if we look at the results of the executive opinion survey, and Francesca, if you take me on to the next slide, we can have a look at that. So these are executive views, right? Executives and how they view the world. And Francesca, if we have a look at the next slide, we can actually see what that is, right? So now we see a lot more blue. And we've picked out, if you look at the appendix of the report, you can find every country's survey results here. But I've picked out a few around Europe that might be indicative of the trend here. And really what we're seeing is a lot more blue. We see inflation is still a worry. We see economic downturn is a worry in Europe, labor and talent shortages as well. So definitely something to worry about, or certainly, and the backdrop in Europe is one of slow growth. And another report that was issued quite recently, which is interesting to look at as well, is the Chief Economist's report from 2025, also released just before Davos. And in this report, chief economists from around the world are saying, global inflation is easing, but global trade was in 2024 was $33 trillion. And they do expect that to grow a little in 2025. So that about 3.4%, which is largely in line with IMF growth projections, which is about 3%. Now, there are huge regional variations. And of course, Europe, the GDP growth is very, very subdued. We're less than 1% in Europe, but other places are better. China is not great for China, but it is still above 4%. And good growth is expected in the US and Southeast Asia and India. Now, this report was issued, or this was the survey was carried out in November and December of last year. So this was after the US election. So it was under the chief economists understood the way that the direction of travel in terms of where the US were going. And what they're saying is that they expect US policy to have a long-term impact on global trade, but that the new administration's tariffs are likely to be less, than their the bombastic promises. We'll see. Every day there's something new to be learned from the US anyway. I guess what we're saying though is that geopolitical tensions are still a drag on trade, but they are likely to be offset by growing trade between countries that are more geopolitically aligned. So we're seeing realignment. So trade routes and trade partners will change over time. And there's a huge focus on trade in government. So for instance, I mentioned I'm from Ireland. In our newly formed coalition government, our new foreign affairs minister has now additional responsibilities around international trade. And really, when I look, Ireland has built economic success over the last 30 years around attracting multinational investment. So, we've seen Brexit, now we're seeing tariff suggestions or the impositions of tariffs from the US, one of our largest trading partners. I mean, really, we all need to have a seat at the table. So, governments around the world are really focusing on trade, and as business leaders as well, businesses need to sort of encourage their governments to create these bilateral trade agreements. So this is one of the opportunities. So change in the landscape, but where there's change, there's opportunity. So maybe if you bring me to my last slide, then what do we do? What are the strategic imperatives? So really, as risk managers and as a risk management community, what can we do? So we have plenty to offer. We have expertise. We know about modeling. We know about risk. So we can certainly help our organizations with these risks. Essentially, we need to use future scenario testing, and we need to stress test investments and growth strategies. Supply chain is going to be, understanding your supply chain and potentially moving and changing supply chains, given the way that the world of the trading environments are changing. That's definitely going to be something that's key. And so using AI to get line of sight into those supply chains is going to be really, really important, because lots of companies have really good line of sight into tier 1 supply chains, but then that visibility really deteriorates when you're talking about tier 2 or tier 3. So yes, leveraging AI is going to be hugely important. And then lastly, trust. Misinformation and disinformation, it's not just about society, it's also about us as organizations. We need to work within our workforces, our economies, and our societies really to transform, to encourage trust, and to really link risk and people with strategy. So that is the end of my doom and gloom, Daria, outline that coming from the Global Risks Report.
Yeah, I wish it was just yours, but apparently it's everybody else's doom and gloom, right? So this is, and I think, so I do have some questions also myself and be curious to hear your take, but I'll wait until the end for us to discuss this. But this, and you mentioned this is the World Economic Forum report. There's also the Chief Economist report and several others. And what does this then mean for the risk managers? And Laurence, you've kindly offered us to go through the risk manager's perspective of how to then relate to this and how do they see it. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daria. Then thank you, Francesca. We can go to the next slide. So we thought it was important to, and thanks, Lorraine, for giving us this summary of the gloomy future, but still very important, because if we address that correctly, hopefully we will also be able to find some opportunities, as you said in the beginning. And it is really an important report for risk managers, because it's really a base for them to bring their risk assessment and give some insight in the organization. But as this is a very important report, FERMA also organized a global and international risk management survey to understand how risk managers are seeing risks currently, and also how are they prepared for the transformation of those risks and the environment in general. So the survey was done between January and April last year in 2024, so even before the global risk report. And it was done, we had 1,041 respondents. We speak about the global survey because it was not only European risk managers, but it's even risk managers from everywhere in the world, in the different continents. And then also from different industries, financial services and public sector. I will not take too long, because I think we need to base our discussion on the global risk report, but we wanted to bring you the lens of the risk managers. What we can see is that, so the survey follows the same principle as the one in the global risk report, meaning that we will ask a respondent to rank risk in the short, mid and long term. And we can see that even here in the beginning of the year, macroeconomic uncertainties combined with geopolitical tension were the current risk landscape beginning of 2024. 27% of the respondents said that management doesn't focus on geopolitical risks. And I will bring that more and more into discussion and on the geopolitical threat. On the long term, risk managers were mostly focusing, and they say the long-term risks are associated with climate change, which is not a surprise, both from a regulatory point of view, but also a pure physical risk aspect with the natural catastrophes. What is quite interesting is that artificial intelligence doesn't seem to be on top of risk managers and the agenda, on the short and even the long term. And what is a little bit scary, or could be a concern, is that in the survey, risk manager mentioned that AI is even not or doesn't require enough attention from the top management. Francesca, if we go to the next slide. So what we could see also from the last part is that risk managers tell that unfortunately those risks are not on the CEO's agenda. But we were a little bit surprised about that answer, and we thought maybe this shows a dichotomy or a miscommunication between CEOs and risk managers, because it is quite sure that CEOs have this on the agenda. We need to understand now if it's a double process, if the ERM or risk assessment or risk function processes are embedded, and if risk managers are involved in the discussion with the board or with the the C-suite. So if we look here, the good news is that many of risk managers say that actually they are part of the strategic risk response, and within that they mean that they are part in the discussion related to sustainability and geopolitics. So it looks like the collaboration exists between C-suite and CEOs and risk managers, which is a good news. But now it's the how and where do we need to improve the communication, the reporting, so that the risk manager understand this or are more involved in the discussion with the C-suite. So we can also see that the need for resources to assess sustainability risk and the impact is really important. And this is where risk managers are the most involved, where we see also a lower representation of risk managers in the support of business impact analysis and scenario analysis of the business plan. If we can go to the next slide, please, Francesca. So speaking about sustainability, so we mentioned in the beginning, and Lorraine mentioned that climate change is part of the long-term risks. And the good news is that risk managers are very much involved in assessing and helping sustainability to assess ESG risks, not only on the environmental part, but also when it comes to social risks, as 75% support ESG and sustainability function to establish human rights risks on the heat map. So that's very good. But there we see challenges for all, and this is where insurer and broker will help, I guess, risk manager in the future. Still, it is the difficulty to quantify ESG risk and also the lack of data to monitor them. If we go to the next slide. Thank you, Francesca. So this is also something which is interesting, is the role of the risk manager in the digital transformation. The survey showed that actually many, even 88% of risk managers still use Excel sheets and spreadsheets to monitor risks and to assess the risks, which is, of course, an area for improvement if we want to be more efficient, quick, especially answering the global risk landscape that changes on a daily basis. So there is really improvement to make, and also in the use of AI. So we also say that risk manager speak about AI. They are really taking action to understand AI as an emerging risks. So monitor the development of legislation, what are the consequences of those, and also developing internal policies to protect companies around AI and risks that are associated to that. And then the next slide. Thank you. So that's the last slide. So you mentioned, Lorraine, that some of the mitigation actions that companies have is insurance and how that will evaluate in the future. And this was also something that risk managers have notified, and it was clear in the survey. So there were 50% of risk manager of that survey are mostly involved in purely ERM, but also insurance. So many of them have a view on how the insurance industry will evaluate in the coming years. And we can see 3 takeaways from that report. So first of all, insurance strategy will remain crucial and evaluate the strategy following the risk landscape. So how do we will continue to transfer the risks in this complex environment using alternative solutions. The other takeaway was the rising concern over the insurability of critical risks, as you mentioned, Lorraine, as well. So this is also how do we work with insurers and with the brokers to be able to insure those risks which become more and more insurable, and what are the alternatives if the insurance market will not be able to provide solutions. And then the last part is, as we will not find solutions in the insurance market or less insurance solutions, then we'll have to go to alternative transfer solutions like parametrics, but also the use of the captives. So we have really seen the rise of captives and the involvement of captive and their retention within the insurance industry and in the industries. So this is a little bit the summary that I wanted to bring. So risk managers are really in the same kind of thinking than as the academia and the executive. So that's the good news, and they still have a really big role to play to support organization in these very turbulent times. Thank you, Daria.
Thank you so much. So now we've been through 2 reports. They obviously have similarities, as we could see, but they also have differences. And maybe to help us map out these differences in a broader overview, Anne, you've offered us to do that. So please.
Thank you very much. So yes, so if we could have my first slide, please, before we get into comparisons. I just wanted to talk a bit about our report, which is the Risk in Focus 2025 report, which we run every year. We've just had our 9th year. This is, again, we have multiple methods here. So we do a survey and we have 985 participants in that. We had 5 roundtable events, which is like a focus group, people talking about some themes, 48 people involved in that, and 11 in-depth interviews as well. So we do quite a lot of work around this. We looked and did this between the period of March and May last year, so very similar to the timing of the FERMA report and kind of so very much in the same similar landscape at that time. Ours isn't global, ours is focused on the EU and the UK, and we're involved with internal audit professionals. So the 3rd line in the 3 lines model rather than the 2nd line and the 1st line so much, but really the heads of internal audit. We have various industries represented as well, business, financial services, and also public sector being the 3 key ones that are in there. Again, we ask the same questions in the survey, the results you can see on screen. For the 16 risks on screen, can you rank them in kind of most significant to least for current and also in 3 years' time? And we also ask them to rank how much time they're spending in their internal audit plans on each of those risk areas as well. So that on screen you can see a very quick summary of the 16, so it can be a bit hard to read. But the top 5, number 1 is cybersecurity and data security, which has been at number 1 for several years, if not since we've been doing the report. So it's quite a well-established concern for organisations from the CAEs we asked to participate. But human capital, diversity, talent management and retention, again, kind of in that top 5, and in a few years' time, slipping down slightly, but still in the top 5. Changes in laws and regulations, we have as a separate category, because it is quite a risk area for lots of organisations. It's more to do with the speed of change. as well. And obviously that laws and regulations can change in all of the other 16, 15 risk categories. So that can be why it kind of features in the top 5. Digital disruption and new technology, which included AI, we have as a separate category. Top 4 for this year, number 4 for this year, but climbing to 2nd place in 3 years' time. So heads of internal audit really seeing organisations struggling, but continuing to struggle, and more so, and it becoming more of a risk in the future. Macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty, currently top 5, but slipping out the top 5 in 3 years' time. So a bit of a shift there. So if I could have the next slide, please. And I'll just take you through some of those in a bit more detail. So cybersecurity and data security, 83% of our respondents said that this was in their top 5 for their organisations. And 4 in 10 said it was their number 1 priority in their organisation. And like I say, it's been ranked top place for a very long time in our survey. We've seen an increase in the volume of cyber attacks, and obviously the instigators of cyber attacks, state attacks, etc., becoming more increasing. And obviously at the time we did this, the EU regulation, the NIS, the Network Information System within the UK, but also many EU countries were preparing for regulations around AI as well as cybersecurity. But very much heads of audit saying this is a key area of assurance in their organisations, and they're spending a lot of time looking at this. Next slide, please. Human capital diversity and talent management, so ranked number 2 currently. Seen very much as an issue, not only within organisations, but within internal audit teams. And we know across the globe from conversations we've had that recruiting people with the right skills is a real challenge in a lot of professions itself as well. But seeing this as a real challenge, because post-pandemic people are re-evaluating their work-life balance and want something different out of that. And many professionals are actually leaving professions, and we haven't got the people coming through so much, so or they're demanding or wanting different things. So this is proving quite challenging for organisations to manage, and it's increasing risk within their organisation as well. Next slide, please, Francesca. Digital disruption and new technology and artificial intelligence, very much a discussion, and I actually attended the focus group for this one. And one of the things that organisations are really challenged about is having people with the right skills and knowledge within them to actually manage the implementation and adoption of artificial intelligence, but also the speed of change of artificial intelligence. I was speaking to somebody last week who is purchasing software which has AI built into it, and week on week those AI tools within software are changing and being enhanced at quite a fast rate. So this is impacting on organisations and actually seen as a risk that's only going to increase and move further up the ranking. And actually being able to provide assurance and managing the risks associated with this is a challenge, because it is developing so quickly. Keeping on top of that skills and knowledge and connected back to talent management is a real challenge in organisations, because obviously a lot of these things are connected. As we saw in the WF report, they are all connected and they all have that knock-on, that domino effect of risk. So you can't look at these in isolation necessarily. Next slide, please, Francesca. Macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty. Again, at the time, we hadn't had the US election, we hadn't had the UK election, we knew it was coming. So, kind of people were rating these quite highly again. And we don't see that abating, we don't see that changing as things move through. Interestingly, whilst it's in the top 5 of risks in organisations, when we look at internal audit plan coverage and the assurance around this, very similar to what we were just hearing in the FERMA report, this is an area that kind of doesn't get a lot of attention in organisations. That could well be down to the fact that there's less to control. There's very less influence around preventative measures here. This is very much a responsive kind of control environment very often, and that kind of plays into, well, how do we do assure, how do we control this? Because, you know, it's kind of one of those things that is harder to manage within an organisation. So again, that's probably explains the differences around the audit coverage, the assurance coverage in an organisation. Next slide, please. And finally, climate change, biodiversity and environmental sustainability. So 33% of respondents said that climate change, it was a top 5 risk, and 15% said it was their top priority in their organisation. And again, you know, kind of this is something that's been bubbling away. It connects back to the changes in laws and regulations being in the top 5, because there's a lot of movement and deadlines and timescales keep changing for implementing various bits and pieces. So it's kind of bubbling away in organisations, but many are actually responding more to the regulatory side rather than adopting environmental practices because of ESG, if you see what I mean. So they're very focused on carbon reporting and so on and getting assurance around that, rather than looking at how they can embed environmentally sound practices within their processes, etc. So that's something that came out in our kind of conversations that we had through the focus groups and the interviews that we do. Next slide, please. So that's what we found in our risk in focus. We are in our 10th year, we're just planning it now. I've just done a very quick summary between the 3 reports and the methodologies, but as you can see, there's a lot of, they're all around a very similar size, as is looking in the EU and UK, whereas the FERMA and the WEF are global reports. But again, looking at different professionals, and different bases, and go into a different kind of professional base, but still we're seeing a lot of similarities around that. Next slide, please. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz through this. So looking at FERMA and the risk, there's a lot of similarities, cybersecurity being up there and in the top. And I noticed in the Q&A, somebody commented with the WEF report, oh, it's really interesting that cybersecurity isn't up there, but then when you looked at the business side, it was. Talent management, geopolitical being common themes, and economic growth coming through in there, but some different rankings and different, you know, the reports don't categorise risks in exactly the same way, but there are overlaps in there that you can see as well. And like I said, in the risk in focus from the internal audit profession, we have that changes in laws and regulations as being a key top 5 risk, and managing that risk through in an organisation, but also digital disruption around the current. Next slide, please. With the WEF risk ranking, while their categories are very different to the other reports, there is some very similarities. So state conflict relates to the geopolitical, extreme weather events relates to climate change and so on. So there is overlap. I think what's really interesting in the WEF report is that focus on mis and disinformation, but also that societal polarisation. I think those are the 2 things that don't come out as strongly in our report. And obviously we look at our risk categorisation every year when we redo it. So I'll be taking that into account. And then there were some things that didn't come out in the WEF top 5 in the survey with the academics is what I'm talking about. And talent management in there was quite low compared to the other 2. Next slide, please. I think I'm nearly there. Looking forward to the 2-year and the 3-year horizon, you can start to see some similarities though coming through between the 3, more so across these. And I've tried to use colour coding to try and demonstrate that. So you've got more overlap and things kind of coming through a little bit more with FERMA moving into that, changes in laws and regulations coming out in their as their number one. We've got a lot going on in Europe with AI regulation and so on and so forth as well, and IT regulation. So I think that's where that's coming from. And with changes in government comes changes in regulators and therefore laws. So I think that's why we're probably seeing that come through more so in the 2 to 3 year time horizon. So that's all I was going to say. I think that was the last of my slides. If we could just move forward a slide for me to double check, but I'm pretty sure that was the last one from my group. Yes. So that's it. So I'll hand back to you, Daria, to kind of chair the Q&A session.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the three of you. I think this is, this is quite a treat to be taken through these reports, which are quite extensive, but also extremely important. So I think, thank you so much. At least it really clarified a few of the things for me, hopefully also for everybody joining. But I think we'll spend the last couple of minutes on taking some of the questions that have come in. And I would encourage anyone who has questions, please drop them in the Q&A. Maybe this is, I'll maybe start with Laurence, but I think everybody can chip in, and I may as well. So there's a question from Otto asking whether risk management capabilities are actually up to the challenge, and especially considering the dependencies. He mentions the risk side, but also the economic side. But I think maybe a broader question, considering that the risk environment, if it isn't exacerbated by the current trends, but also the risk environment seems more uncertain and more volatile, are the risk management capabilities up to the challenge? Laurence, maybe we'll start with you, and feel free to jump in, ladies.
Thank you. So I think that the risk manager need more and more to use, to collaborate, first of all, internally. You have a lot of risk functions, you have a lot of knowledge in the organization, and they need to have that information in that organization to better understand risks. And then we have also other aspects like foresight, you have scenario analysis. These are tools that risk managers need to use more and more. They need to embrace that. But so yes, there are tools, but risk managers need to use those tools. And in the survey, it was mentioned that many of the risk managers use spreadsheets and so on. We need to evaluate. We need to be more agile, use technology, and then use these peers and so on.
And if I may step in there, if I think back to 10 years ago or before, the risk management community, particularly in Europe, would have been, made up of a lot of people who would be very focused on the insurance transaction, right? They're very focused on placing insurance every year. That has changed. And I was just really heartened to see, Laurence, your slide there on the broadening risk manager engagement across the organization, where 91% of risk managers are involved in corporate strategy, right? So that that wasn't happening years ago. But also what you say there about the 88% still using spreadsheets. Oh, it's hard. That's disheartening. However, the one thing I suppose, sometimes the defining the risk manager's role in the organization and elevating it and making sure that the risk manager really is connected to stakeholders across the organization. One thing that the risk manager brings to the table is that access, right, to all of that information from brokers and from experts. And we have the tools, we have the intel, so that we can bring these to you now. I think that's possibly a definitive maybe, or a differentiator between maybe the chief risk officer and the risk management leader.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I would agree as well. I mean, it's something we kind of are talking about in the internal audit, and obviously internal audit and risk do work and collaborate and work very closely together very often, because both are assurance providers. Whether you're in risk, you're in the second line, and if you're in internal audit, in the third line. And actually, it's about that interplay and that collaborating, but also recognizing that you don't have the knowledge, but having connections and that collaborative and that person to go to who does have the knowledge that can help you. and recognizing that, you know, kind of there are people in the first line who also, they are managing risk day to day, you know, kind of, and it's part of everybody's job. So it is about working collaboratively so that you recognise, I don't have the knowledge, but I know who does in my organisation. So I can go and have that conversation with them, or where is my network outside of this organisation that can help me? And as ever, training, qualifications, everything like that is so important, because risk and internal audit are about challenge, are about helping our organisations to improve and to make sure that we succeed and we deliver what we're here and for.
I guess maybe I'll just take another question to follow up on this. So there's one of the attendees is asking whether we can share some guidance on how to best assess and quantify the impact of some of these key top risks. And also I think there's one maybe for you, Anne, as to how do you audit geopolitical risk? So something like that. So, but how would you care to share some of your take on how do we actually assess and quantify the impacts of these key top risks, which are very macro? Anyone? And I think that's the nature of them, right? So they're very difficult to quantify. Also, part of it is up for interpretation because these are very high level titles. But I think given my own experience with ERM, where I also spent 4 years of my life, I think part of this is having this conversation across the organization, making sure that you tap into the different parts of the organization, actually very openly asking them, so if this were to transpire, where's the hotspot for us in terms of what is the highest likelihood of this occurring, whatever the interpretation is in-house, and then what is the maximum impact, and then try and look at, it could be top line, it could be bottom line, it could be disruptions in operations, whatever. So I think there's not one answer to this, and I don't know if you guys would agree, but I think it's very much looking at what matters to you in terms of metrics, and then going across the organizations to explore the impact.
FERMA will put in place, so we have the ERM committee where we'll try to provide risk manager with some tools, because to your point, each risk has to be approached in a different way. You can quantify cyber risk in the way that you will look at geopolitical risk. One will be more scenario analysis, the other one can be Monte Carlo, so and others discussion and focus on business continuity plans is the best solution. So we will try to provide risk manager with a lot of tools, a toolbox, and then it really depends on the organization, your footprint, every risk is different and every organization is different.
But doesn't it go back to the risk register? That's kind of where it might start, and that sort of probably leads into Anne then talking about the audit. So it starts with identifying the risks, and then addressing, heat mapping each risk to determine, what the impact might be, and then measuring that. And maybe that's over to you then.
Yeah, I think in the risk assessment, etc., risk appetite, what is the appetite of the board, of your organisation in relation to the different risk categories, because that drives how you need to assess. Because if there's a risk, if there's an appetite, a tolerance level, a risk level set, then you know what you need to measure against. So the impacts, the likelihood, also the velocity, the speed at which risk materializes. If the event happens, how soon afterwards do we feel the impact? That is so important to understand, because that then helps you determine, well, what kind of controls, what kind of treatments do I need to have after the fact. Very quickly around providing assurance on macro geopolitical risk. It's like anything else, it's a risk, and kind of with the risk you'd expect a framework of things and activities, and I always use for any risk when I'm looking at it, things to look at and to consider when you're providing assurance. So how is that risk governed? How does it feed into the governance structure? So what is the risk appetite around macro geopolitical risk? What are your policies that you've got? What have you written? What is your attitude towards them? What procedures are they? What's on the risk register? How is this assessed on the risk register? Is it part of a risk assessment matrix? Is it a particular impact category, and what have you? But also, how does this risk then connect into or lead into other risks? So you're very much looking at the domino effect of risk and thinking about bow tie diagrams. I'm throwing loads of risk tech words out. So when you're doing an internal audit, that's what you're looking at, is not kind of where is the risk, where's the next gate conflict going to be potentially, but does our organisation have a process in place to monitor that? It's not up to internal audit to be able to kind of do that. We're looking at the framework that's in place that helps manage and keep aware of those risks, and then kind of what are the responses to those risks. So those are the things. And whilst in our standards we do now talk about foresight, kind of, and helping our organisation and having insight, it's from doing that assurance work that we do it. We're not there to we're there to work with risk management around insight and foresight, not replace them. If that makes sense. So I hope that's helped a little bit.
And I can see, unfortunately, we're out of time, and there's so many other really good questions, and I hope we'll get around to them maybe in another session. But for now, I'd really like to thank you, ladies, for sharing your insights and for taking the time, because I think, at least for me, it was extremely valuable. You can see we had so many people online that it wasn't just me. So thank you so much also to everyone joining and for your questions. Again, I hope we'll get to respond at another time. Meanwhile, you can download all the discussed reports. So the World Economic Forum report, the FERMA Risk Manager Survey, and the Risk and Focus reports, both in the chat, where I see we posted the links, but also I think we'll make a QR code available in a second. And last but not least, given that risk is not going anywhere in terms of our agenda, and I would really like to remind you all that there is a European risk management seminar taking place October 23rd to 24th in Zurich. It's an exclusive event, and I think the registration will open in March. So please put it in your calendars and join, because I don't think we're done discussing risk anytime soon. Thank you so much. And I guess, yeah, let's just stay vigilant and relevant, because I think risk managers are probably more relevant than ever. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, ladies, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Have a great day, everybody.
You too.